Alright, so yesterday was pretty much National Final Fantasy 16 Day, as we had a ton of previews and interviews drop for the game, but there's one interview in particular that's been making the rounds and causing quite the bit of discourse online in regards to the term JRPG, and that video comes to us from Skill Up. So Ralph from Skill Up was able to speak to Yoshi P and a number of senior developers at Square Enix who are working on Final Fantasy 16 and asked them a lot of really great questions. Now, one of the questions he asks Yoshi P is in regards to the term JRPG, which kind of creates a snowball effect that maybe turns the interview sideways. However, I want to say that I think Ralph did a fantastic job with this video. I think the questions that he asks were really insightful and unique, and they're leading to a discourse, a conversation online that we can all now have in regards to the term JRPG, what it actually means, where it comes from, and how it still has a negative connotation for some Japanese developers today. Now, before we get into that, full transparency, my personal viewpoint and take on this might be kind of ignorant. And when I say ignorant, I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean that as in I didn't know about any of this. So I myself and a lot of other people are going to be getting quite the history lesson in regards to the term JRPG. At the start of the interview, Ralph asks Yoshi P about a comment that he had made in regards to the action game genre and how Yoshi stated that action games have really evolved a lot over the years and have pretty much become the new norm for a lot of games. In response to that, Ralph says, "So do you think in turn that means that JRPGs have stagnated?" And when Yoshi hears the term JRPG, Ralph describes it as him being kind of offended or uncomfortable. Yoshi P goes on to say that the term JRPG actually still has a negative connotation to this day for a lot of Japanese developers for a number of reasons. A, the separation of JRPG from RPG was something that he was not a big fan of, because he states that even Japanese developers, when they set out to make an RPG, they're not setting out to make a JRPG, they want to make an RPG. So the fact that that was segregated was something that he took offense to and that never really set right with him. And he expands on the taking offense part and how it's basically a derogatory term for him, is because so many people back 15 years ago and maybe even to this day viewed JRPGs as a genre that were less than. It was something to poke fun at, something like, oh, look at that JRPG over there, we can't take that seriously, it's bright and colorful, it's super anime, there's all of these weird tropes that just haven't aged well, and it discredits the work that a lot of Japanese developers put into their games. Which, hearing that response absolutely blew my mind because I've been a huge fan of JRPGs since I was like 6 years old. My first JRPG was Final Fantasy VII. I remember playing that and just being blown away because of how different it was and how it was so different from what we were getting in the West from American developers, and I loved what JRPGs were. I loved that style. So to find out years later that JRPG was actually something that had a negative connotation absolutely blew my mind. Yoshi goes on to say how it was a term that was really coined by the West to describe the games that were coming out of Japan, and I could see how that could be a positive thing because this is a Japanese style RPG, but again, going back to what Yoshi says, they just set out to make an RPG. That's all they wanted to do. And to have their work compartmentalized and reduced down to anime tropes and not being taken seriously or having weird mechanics or like stilted dialogue, which, don't get me wrong, there are tons of Japanese RPGs that do have that. I love Crisis Core, but that game from a writing standpoint is weird. It's a mess. Maximilian Dude actually uses the term weird anime robot to describe a lot of characters from that JRPG era 15 years ago or so that Square had with games like Crisis Core, with games like Kingdom Hearts, even something like Final Fantasy 13, which was incredibly divisive upon release. That game got hammered for being so linear, for its writing, for its characterization, for the stilted dialogue. It's something that to this day is still very controversial, which ends up leading into why Final Fantasy 16 is primarily a heavy action game, is because Yoshi P states that the younger generation, they didn't grow up on turn-based combat. They want that immediate reaction. You press a button and something happens. They grew up on the first-person shooters of the world, the Grand Theft Autos. They need that instant gratification, whereas someone like myself and whoever's watching this video, we grew up with turn-based games, so we're familiar with that genre. It's something that we're still accepting of. And I think based on this conversation, it sounds like Yoshi P feels that Final Fantasy as a franchise has stagnated and it's not as big as it needs to be. It's not as serious as it needs to be, which is kind of odd because Final Fantasy 15, regardless of how you feel about the game's quality, sold really well. Personally, I will go full defense force for Final Fantasy 15. I love that game. I have zero issues with it, but it also hit me at a time in my life where I really needed it. So it affected me on a much deeper level than maybe some other people would. And he wants to bring new people into the world of Final Fantasy. He wants it to be a tentpole franchise again that people look at and take seriously, instead of viewing as this anime type thing that has less to offer. And he expands upon meeting people from around the world and how their image of Final Fantasy is what it used to be, that anime tropey, teens saving the world, melodramatic, stilted writing and dialogue, antiquated, I guess is one of the best ways to put it. I think even Ralph mentions the term fossilized is how Yoshi P might view Final Fantasy, which is a little weird because you look at something like Final Fantasy VII Remake, which came out and did really well financially as well as critically, and that game really pushed the genre forward. I feel that what they did with Final Fantasy VII Remake's mechanics, blending action with turn-based RPG elements, was perfect, and it really did bring in a bunch of new people. But the downside to bringing in new people is that eventually you change your game so much that you alienate the people that were there already. And that's what's happening with Final Fantasy 16, and I think Yoshi realizes that you need to make sacrifices to bring in a wider audience, but you need to make sacrifices also to grow your game and your franchise, to have it evolve, to bring people in and be like, wow, I didn't realize this is what Final Fantasy was now. Maybe I should stick around for the next one. And Ralph even says that maybe Yoshi P didn't quite feel like Final Fantasy VII did enough to push the envelope in terms of its mechanics and presentation, which is going to cause some controversy online. The fan base is already split. You've got the people that worship at the altar of Yoshi P. You got the people that worship at the altar of Nomura and Nojima. I'm very middle of the road. I'm very open to what Final Fantasy is becoming. I personally, again, think that 7 Remake had the perfect balance with that action mechanics, with the RPG stuff, so I think they really nailed it in that respect. And that seems to be the sentiment. Yoshi P just loves Final Fantasy, and he wants it to be that big event again. He wants people to be wowed by Final Fantasy again. And of course, before we end the video, there is the positive side of JRPGs and how it doesn't have that negative connotation. You look at a franchise like Persona, which is unabashedly JRPG. It wears the JRPG branding on its sleeve and it's proud of it. It's over the top, it's flamboyant, it's loud, it's got crazy kooky characters and storylines, and it's turn-based and it's successful. So to the flip side of what Yoshi P's argument is, not every Japanese developer is going to feel that way and be offended by that term. Others will embrace it and find ways to make it work. So let me know in the comments down below, what do you guys think about this whole conversation in regards to the term JRPG? Were you aware of those negative connotations and how it affected Japanese developers? Do you agree with Yoshi P? Or do you think maybe he's just getting a little bit too carried away with how he feels about that term? Let me know in the comments down below how you guys feel. I am Curious Corduroy. I will see you guys in the next video. Please remember to always be excellent to one another.